Okay, well, there's literally nobody here. But I think I'm going to go ahead and start answering some of the questions because this will end up, yeah. I hope you guys can hear me okay. I was going to put on some headphones so there'd be a speaker. Now I'm wondering if I did something wrong because I did post this on Instagram. Well, I think we're just going to go for it now because I have a million questions and this will be up later. So, yes, sorry for the weird beginning. Okay, so let me see. I guess I'm just going to start at the beginning. My questions are all over the place here. I haven't organized them all, and I'm going to put a sticky note on top of the number of people watching because I don't want to get distracted by the fact that there's nobody watching right now. All right, so yes, first question is from Devonte Bailey. Devonte says, I have been a professional artist for years and I've been charging way less for my services. Do these prices only apply to companies? And Devonte had watched a video, one of my many videos referencing the gag guide. These questions are kind of all over the place for different topics. Most of them are business art related, but the short answer is yes, the prices in the gag guide do mainly apply to corporations or commercial entities, so people who are making money from the work, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a super big company. It could be just like a sole proprietor or a small family-owned business. Kind of the whole gamut between like an individual business versus like a big corporation, anything in there, but it wouldn't really apply if you're like making private commissions or you're doing like portraits of people's kids or pets or, you know, house portraits or making gifts for an individual that isn't going to then like turn around and sell that thing to make money. Yeah, it's pretty much just like non-commercial prices would be different. Hope that is clear enough there. Next question is from Jennifer, a similar topic. Jennifer says, I'm wondering how much less to charge based on the rural area I live in. When I'm working with small clients here in the country, budgets are tiny and it's hard to know what to charge without being offensive. Any ideas or advice? I would need to know, I feel like a little bit more to get more specific here, whether you're in a different country or if you're in the US, that would potentially affect it. But overall, I would say prices should be on, like if you're going off of the gag guide, there are lots of different ways to get the prices. You know, you could go off of what's on the gag guide. You could look on, I've mentioned Lightbox before a number of times. You could look on Lightbox. You'll see a different range of prices there that people charge depending on what it is they're doing and their experience level. Another one I've mentioned before, another reference I've mentioned before is Jessica Hish, her Dark Art of Pricing. She had a free PDF online at one point. I don't know if she still has it up there, but it's several years old now. And she has just released a new one that's like 10 or 15 bucks. That's a lot more comprehensive and has like a pricing kind of scale. But the basic answer is if you are working with a really small client, which it sounds like you are, you should charge probably on the lower end of the range. And if you're working with a really large client and the larger project, then you charge on the higher end of the range. So that's the general rule of thumb. As for how much less to charge, it's just tough to say. I mean, you can look at the ranges that are in there. Like one of the ranges is for packaging illustration. I think I talked about that in the video, and the range is like from 1,000 to 4,000. And you could just go with something in the 1,000, or I'll say that here, I've charged more than 4,000 for a packaging illustration. If it's super complicated, there's lots of different elements and it's for a big company. And then I have, at different points, I've charged a little bit less than 1,000 too, if it's a really simple one and it's for a smaller company like a startup or a mom and pop shop. And then if I do that though, if I charge on the lower end, I will also restrict the rights more. So I make it so that they, aren't able to use it in as big of a way as the big company because they're paying much, much less. So if somebody pays less than $1,000 for a packaging illustration, for me, I might say that that would mean that they would be able to be selling it like at their shop or maybe at a few other shops in their local area, but they wouldn't be able to, be selling it like internationally or something the way that a big company would. Yeah, so small company on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of the rates, larger company on the higher end of the spectrum. Um, Next question is from Paulina. And Paulina asks, this was on one of the client fears series, the one about pricing. And in that series, I talked about how you should probably be more concerned with asking for too little versus asking for too much, because that is what most artists have a problem with. And Paulina asks, what do you do if you do charge too much? And she says, I sent my art to a gallery in the US and sent them prices that I thought were based on US prices. I should say some of these questions that are longer, I'm gonna like rephrase them a little bit. And later I saw that you were selling your originals and realized that I was charging more than you were for your originals, which was just wrong. Your art is above mine any day, but the gallery never really gave me feedback on the price. Now I've only sold one of my paintings and I feel a lot of regret. Okay, so first up, Paulina, I'm gonna take you to task a bit on my art being above yours. That is just not even that it's not true, but it's just not a helpful comparison. Like, and I know it's so hard. We all compare ourselves all the time. We're like wired to do that, but you shouldn't be thinking about it that way. And even though I do give advice on pricing and I talk about how I price things, that should always only be a guideline or not even a guideline, like just a data point, some information, some helpful information that you can take in to decide what actually works for you. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is I am guessing, she hasn't said this, but I'm guessing that you saw the prices for my originals when I was doing my big studio sale. And yes, they were ridiculously low. They were the lowest I've ever sold originals for ever. And I don't know if I will ever sell originals for that little again. Part of the reason I was doing that is because I've been working for a number of years in commercial illustration now, and I just have a ton of paintings, and they're taking up I still didn't sell everything that I wanted to sell. I didn't clear out everything that I wanted to clear out. But I made a choice that I wanted to do something nice for my community, for all these people who have supported me for so long. And I just wanted to get the art into people's homes and to have it enjoyed on their walls. However, I chose very specific pieces and put together collections that way. I don't standardly sell originals for that little. Usually a very small one would be, maybe $250, and a larger one could be anywhere from like $400 to $800. That's for existing originals, not for commissioned works. And I am on the low end of the pricing scale for original art. And I know, yes, there's going to be people who will comment and who'll say, well, what about on Etsy? I see original paintings being sold for $10, $20. Yes, that's true. That's the low end. But the reality is lots of folks are selling original paintings for much more than that. So there isn't really there's no reason that you should be using what I sold my artwork for as the metric for how much you can sell yours for, especially if you're working with a gallery too, because a gallery is going to take a commission. So if you're working with a gallery, you have to charge more. So don't compare your prices to my prices when I was doing a once in maybe a lifetime sale where my goal was not to make a living. That sale is not how I am supporting myself. Most of how I support my family is through commercial illustration. So especially if you're somebody whose primary thing is selling originals or doing commissions, then you really you have to charge more. So yeah, and the feeling of regret, I mean, that's tough. And there are other reasons, other factors that could be at play for why things didn't sell. You could have things priced really well, and they still wouldn't sell. I had my huge studio sale. Things were so cheap, and I still probably only, I think I sold maybe like 2/3 of the paintings. So yeah, I guess that's not a conclusive answer, but I hope it's an encouraging one. And yeah, I don't like to think that anybody would be comparing their work to mine and saying, oh, I'm not as good, or I shouldn't charge as much as Kendall because of this X, Y, or Z. You got to charge what works for you and what supports your life and your artwork. All right, next question is from Gert, I guess that's how I pronounce it. Hey, Sal. And Gert asks, this is a simple one. Can you use oil paint on colored pencil? So oh, you're welcome, Sal. Yes, just at a surface level, there shouldn't be anything wrong with using oil paint on colored pencil. The main problem will come in the substrate, so the surface that you're working on. Most people, when they're working with colored pencil, are working on paper, and unless the paper has been sealed or prepped in some way, you really shouldn't use oil paint on it. I'm not like a huge expert in oil mediums here, but if I remember correctly, there's like two different kinds of oils. There's like an active oils, and inert, no, dry, it's drying and non-drying. That's what it is. So drying and non-drying oils. So yes, there are some oil-based colored pencils, and there are like oil pastels that you use on paper, but those are both non-drying oils. So they don't react with the paper or degrade the paper in any way. But if you put a drying oil, like what's in oil paint, or even like those, like, what are those called? Like they look like a big oil pastel. What are those called? Oil bars, I think, or oil sticks or something like that. I have a couple of them, but anything that is actually going to dry and harden, you really shouldn't use on paper unless you have prepped the paper first in some way. But yes, I can understand why you would think that, because since colored pencils are oil and wax based, it makes sense to use something that's oil or wax based on top of them, but you just have to have the paper sealed in order to do that. Next question is from Sunshine Judy, and this is regarding watercolor pencils. Some of these they're all questions from the past month or so, but some of them are on older videos. So I just thought I would tackle this one anyway, even though it's on an older video. And Judy is wondering whether you can lift some of the colors. When you're working with watercolor pencils, can you lift some of the colors once they've been dry? If you re-wet them, will they lift the way that you can with regular watercolors? And in my experience, the answer is absolutely yes. And I actually feel like watercolor pencils are a little bit easier to lift than traditional watercolor. They reactivate more. I'll say that, like, they reactivate much more easily than traditional watercolor. If by lift you mean, I'm not like a classically trained watercolor painter, so I don't know all of the watercolor terms. Maybe lift means like taking off some of the pigment, if that's what it means. I think it depends on the color, and it depends on how heavily you've laid it down, just like it would depend on those factors if you're working with traditional watercolor. Next question is from Abdullah, and these are a few questions actually all related to Skillshare and teaching on Skillshare. So Abdullah asks, how do you script all the stuff for the video? How do you look into the camera while talking? And do you memorize your script? So I tend to create a super detailed script. Like when I'm making a YouTube video, I don't usually, but that's because I have just resigned myself to the fact that I am going to talk for a long time, and that my videos will be 20 or 30 minutes long, and it just can't be helped. It can be helped, but I have decided not to do anything about it. For Skillshare, on the other hand, I'm always trying to fit a ton of information in a shorter period of time. I try to keep my classes like around an hour or so. So yeah, I have like a very tight script, and I have tried to memorize them. I'm horrific at memorizing things. I just can't do it. It gives me a lot of anxiety, and I would like be filming my Skillshare classes, like trying to memorize things, trying to memorize a line and then look up at the camera and say the line and then look back down and say another line. And I would just have to do the same part like 30 times in a row to get it to where I wanted it to be. And then I would end the day and just like drenched in anxiety sweat, and it was really bad. So I bought a, well, thank you. That's really kind that you say that. I always feel like I ramble on and on, but Anyway, my point in telling you guys that is that I bought myself a teleprompter, or it's a teleprompter attachment, basically. Like, it's not any of the, it's not a machine. It's like yeah, it's an attachment. And you put your phone or your tablet underneath it, and it like reflects the words from your phone or your tablet, and then your camera goes behind it. And I've used it a few times. I'm still making up my mind whether I like it or not. It certainly helps in that I didn't feel like I had to memorize the script. But even though I worked to try to sound natural while I was reading, watching it like next to one of my other videos, I mean, if you have watched my channel for a while, I'm doing it right now. Like, I talk with my hands constantly, and I felt like I didn't really do that very much when I was doing the scripted stuff. Thank you, Disha. um, yeah, so I don't know. I feel like I can't quite give a review. That's why I will hopefully do a review on my teleprompter at some point, but I haven't done it yet because I don't feel like I can like really accurately say yet what my thoughts are about it. But yes, I do super, super detailed scripts. Like, I write out almost every word, and then the best way to look into the camera is either to memorize it, or if you're one of those people who can, like, I know some Skillshare teachers will just have like bullet points or like a broad topic, and then they'll just start going. And that's more of like what I do for YouTube. So I don't know, maybe I should try a class like that on Skillshare someday, just to take it easy on myself and have a little bit less anxiety. All right, next question is from Dora. In some of your previous videos, I heard good advice about what to do when you have no idea how much you should charge, which is to ask the client if they have a budget in mind. But when I tried that recently, I got a quote which was unbelievably low. How do you get out of that sort of situation? Oh, and then she goes on to say, my answer to the client was that I would be able to work on that project, but the fee would need to be 5 times larger than the one that they had quoted, and I never heard from them again, and then felt like a lunatic for telling them how much I would charge. So, yes, that can happen. That has happened to me. Absolutely. That's normal. And I don't think at all you should feel, yay, hey, Dora. Oh, so glad you're here. I don't think you should feel at all like a lunatic for telling them what you would charge. That is just, yeah, I mean, I think I've probably had, just this last week, I've had like 2 or 3, because I get a lot of inquiries, and I've had 2 or 3 where essentially my price ended up being too high. But at a certain point, you also have to ask yourself, like, well, yeah, I guess right now I could just ask you, since you're here, like, would you have felt any better if you had just agreed to do the price for that fee? Like, do you have regret? Like, yes, you've said here you felt like a crazy person for telling them how much you would charge, but are you also feeling like, wow, I wish I had just taken the project for that lower rate? And I'm curious to know, like, maybe you've already thought about that, maybe you haven't, but I would say, it's, if you are feeling regret that wow, like, I wish I had just taken that project. I wish I had just done it for that lower rate. Maybe it's because you really need the money. Maybe it's because you wanted to have the experience, and the project sounded really cool and you liked it. Like, I can't tell you that those are like, that's the wrong thing to do. Like, you're the one who has to decide whether that's the right thing to do or not. But I think at some level, at a certain point, you will have to decide, say you do start taking on projects with these lower fees. And yes, maybe you will get more work with the lower fees, but you will also be working a lot harder, and you'll have less time to do self-initiated projects that will push your work in the direction that you want it to go, which will hopefully end up being something that's more sustainable, that will have, better fees, better rates overall, so that you can keep doing this, that it's a job and a vocation, not something that you're going to burn yourself out on. And your specific question is like, how, if the client sends the low number, like, what do you respond? I would probably just say something pretty similar to what it sounds like you said, that, typically for this type of project, the fee would need to be closer to this range. And I don't know what they quoted, but let's say we've already used the packaging illustration example earlier in this chat, so let's bring that one back up again. Let's say they came back, they're hoping, maybe they're like a small business, and they want to sell some kind of like sauce that they make, I don't know. And maybe they said that their project budget was $100 or something like that, which is way too low for packaging illustration. I probably would come back and say, Oh, wow. Oh my goodness. Yeah, a whole card deck for, oh my goodness, and the whole copyright. No, that's so, yes, so good that you didn't do it. So I'm like way off base with the type of example that I'm doing, but I'm going to finish the example anyway in case it's going to be helpful for somebody. So let's say they said, okay, our budget is $100 for this packaging illustration. I probably would come back and say, well, for a small business, I typically would look for something that's closer in the range of $1,000, which is 10 times their project budget. But depending on what you're willing to agree to, if there's some sort of way that we could constrain the rights, maybe you're only going to get to use it to sell that product in your actual shop. And if you want to start selling it in grocery stores, we'd need an expansion of rights. Potentially I could work with you on something like $800. So I would say like what the typical range would be, and then I would offer a way that we could limit like what the value that they were actually getting to make the project a little bit smaller. Another way you could do that is just to like, say that the illustration is going to be a little bit less detailed, or it's going to be a smaller scale, any of those things, and then offer them this a slightly reduced rate, and then see what they come back with. So yes, I agree. Dora made the right decision, and I'm so glad that you feel good about it, Dora. Yeah, sometimes it's just something you have to be willing to go back and forth with, and know that it's totally normal, and it feels really uncomfortable. I mean, it still feels kind of uncomfortable now, if I'm honest, but I'm just way more I'm desensitized to it at this point, so I'm way more willing to do it. So on to the next question is from Heather Cash Art. This one was on my productivity series. And Heather asks, my question is, do you ever have lazy days? If so, do you just work anyway? Or do you ever just decide to take a day to sleep until noon or veg out? I don't know. I felt kind of nervous to answer this question because I don't, the honest answer is I struggle with having lazy days. And even if I have, like, even before I had kids, like, and having kids makes it way more complicated. I don't know if you guys want to talk about that or not, but like even before I had kids, like I would have a day off and I would just like want to be like trying different recipes all day. Yay. So glad you feel better, Dora. I just want to be like trying different recipes all day, or like going for a hike, or like, yeah, I very rarely would want to have days when I just was truly doing nothing. And I don't think that's healthy. I think that's actually a problem. So that's part of why I don't want to like hold that up as an example, because it's genuinely something that I really struggle with. And having kids, I feel like makes it certain aspects of that harder and certain aspects of it easier. The harder part is that it just makes it so, like, the idea of sleeping until noon, no, that's just off the table. Vegging out is also kind of off the table. I mean, the closest I get to that is like once a week I'll watch a movie, like a Pixar movie, usually just sitting on the couch with Penelope, and that's really nice. I love doing that. But then the thing that has helped me grow, like the thing about having kids that I feel like has helped me address this issue somewhat, is when I'm off, when I'm at home, I have to like be really present and be like with them. So I don't have that ability to just like say, okay, like I'm going to transition now from like working on illustration and work stuff to now like being super driven and serious about like cooking, or building the shelves in this cabinet, or going for like a fast walk, or whatever thing I was working on. Yes, totally, Disha. Yeah, I get that 100%. So yeah, I don't know, like the lazy days, very honestly, I only ever really get to that point when I'm sick. And if anybody has tips on how to embrace that part of yourself, on how to embrace the restful part of yourself, let me know. The thing I've been doing recently is trying to have something that is a hobby, so something that I have to not let myself try to get good at. And so that's why I've been knitting, and I'm like, you know, part of me is like, oh, now I have to knit like really well and make hats for everyone I know and make myself all of my own sweaters now. But I'm trying really hard to just be like, no, this is something I do for fun. This is something I do to relax. I'm not going to get too serious and focused about it. So that was my honest answer. The next one is actually kind of related. It's from Lada. Oh no, Lada Zamina, I think. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. And they ask, could you talk about how you include your rest time in your schedule if you do, and manage to fully recharge without blaming yourself? It's the balance I find the most challenging to tackle. Thank you so much. So, oh yes, ballet. Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. I do dance with my children, but it's nothing close to ballet. It's terrible. It's just like dancing around to pop music. But yes, so I kind of talked about a little bit of this already, but I feel like I've gotten a lot better at including rest time in my schedule since having kids. And rest time just means like time where I'm not trying to be productive. I'm not, to me, that's what it means. I'm not trying to achieve any particular goal. So like the weekends are tricky, like, because they could be rest time because I'm not at work, but on the weekend I am often trying to achieve a lot of particular goals, like with respect to cooking or laundry, or you know, we bought an old house, so we've been like kind of slowly fixing it up, so there's like a million things to work on all the time. So rest time, one of the things I mentioned, knitting, that's something I do recently. I also like one of the most restorative rest times for me. I think it's Brene Brown who talks about like it. Oh man, power nap. That sounds amazing. Brene Brown, who talks about like the importance of play, and I can't remember her exact definition of play, but like one of the things is that it has to like be non-productive. So an area where our whole family and like especially me and the girls really connect over play is with Legos, and even well, not Legos. I will say Legos. I mean Duplos, but even Rosie, who's 18 months now, is like starting to really enjoy building things, and I can't wait until they can do real Legos because I just love Legos. But even with Duplos, we have a ton of Duplos. So I just could sit down on the floor with both girls for like an hour easily and just completely lose track of time. So having kids has made that easier to do, because when I'm with them doing that, it doesn't, yeah, I guess it's just easier for me to not feel guilty about it because it's for them. And I'm like, they need this. They need to have that playtime too. They need to have that time where I'm connected and I'm with them. But I like to think that even now, like when they're older and when they are more independent and don't need me quite in the same way, that that I will still be better at doing that, because I've realized that it helps, yeah, that it helps me too and helps me to de-stress. And thinking of things in a holistic way, like thinking of the whole picture, the comprehensive view of life, and of wanting to be a balanced person and feeling like I'm able to be my best as an illustrator and as a professional when I have balance in the other areas of my life too. That just makes it a lot easier. And then also this, I just thought of this just now, but as I've gotten older, something I have learned is that I will never feel like I've done enough. And part of that, I think, is like what I talked about with the previous question, where I'm a pretty driven person, and I'm just always going to have that fire under my ass, for lack of a better phrase. I'm always going to be just like driving, pushing hard towards something. And so I've recognized that my to-do list is always going to be with me. And even if I finish everything that's on it now, it is immediately going to get filled back up with a million other things. So there is no such thing as that point in time when I'm like going to feel like I deserve to sit down and do nothing, because there's always going to be so many things to do. So that sounds frustrating, and it is kind of frustrating at one level, but at the other level, it's very like freeing, because I just realized there's nothing I can do to completely clear off the to-do list. So I have to go ahead and like live my life and enjoy life now. All right. Next question is from Art Refugium, I think. This is another pricing situation. So it sounds like they agreed to do a book illustration project for a client that had a lot of pieces, multiple pieces, and they were told that they would get paid $1,000 for the whole project. But in the middle of the process, the client let slip that budget was actually for 2 different books. And this person has no contract, but a Facebook message agreement, because I didn't know about contracts back then. And then they say they're not sure what to do. So first of all, I'm so sorry. That is like the worst situation. I have been in that type of situation as well back when I was first getting started. And it's one of those really painful learning experiences, that after it's over, you'll look back and see what you learned from it, and hopefully be able to be grateful for what you learned from it. But when you're in it, it's just excruciating. So I'm really sorry that you're in that. Um, and I think that there are things that you can do. The first one I would kind of be curious about is the Facebook message that you mentioned, the Facebook message agreement that you mentioned. Did you happen to get really specific with the client on like the number of pieces that were included? Just because it's a Facebook message and not a contract doesn't mean it's not like a binding agreement. So I've talked about this in different videos as well. If you have, the main goal is that you want to have a written agreement. So even if you don't have a contract, and there are still times that I do this sort of an agreement as well, even if it's like a smaller project, or maybe it's for a client that I had a contract with at one point and we're just like re-upping, doing some more stuff. I will go off of just the email agreement. So you really do need to have something written. So if you've talked with somebody on the phone, that's great to kind of like get things kicked off. But in terms of like having a binding agreement, having a paper trail, that's basically what you need. It doesn't have to actually be a signed contract. So if you have terms in a message and you laid out, or if they said a specific number of illustrations, or you said a specific number of illustrations or timeline or price or whatever, those are legally binding terms. So if you wanted to push back a little bit on what the client is asking, and you do have that stuff that's spelled out in a Facebook message, you could just say, as per our message, I agreed to this rate for this amount of illustrations, and if we're going to do additional illustrations, the rate will need to increase. The challenging thing, the situation would become more challenging if you haven't spelled out, excuse me, if you haven't spelled out the number of illustrations. So if it's just for like a book project, but it doesn't say a specific number of illustrations. And again, you do have a choice. Even in a situation that is really difficult, where you maybe didn't get agreements laid out at the beginning, you always have a choice in how you want to deal with it, and you don't have to keep putting up with it. If it's just excruciating and you're feeling, put upon, and you're having like way more work than you can than is reasonable to do for that fee, you can just say that. You can say, my understanding when we got started was that the project would include this amount of work. It's turned out that it has included this amount, and it's just not possible for me to continue with this rate. If you've gotten a deposit, it makes it maybe a little bit easier to kind of cut things and run. If you haven't gotten a deposit, it's challenging. You're going to have to decide whether it's worth it to you to try to finish and hopefully get paid. You could also say, like, I have to get some portion of this payment right now if I'm going to continue work. There isn't a cut and dry answer, as you're probably beginning to distill from what I'm saying. But yeah, you're going to have to decide how important it is to you to actually follow through on this. And how uncomfortable you're willing to get in terms of confronting the client. And I'm not saying that you need to be rude or unkind. You can still do all of this and be like really professional and kind, but firm and clear on like what your needs are and where things need to go from here. So, and I will be fully transparent with you guys and say that when I was in that kind of a situation, that a similar thing happened to me. I've probably talked about this in different videos, but a similar thing happened to me early on. And it was the experience that made me say, okay, I have to get a lot more clear about my agreements and like what actually is entailed in scope of work, like how many pieces of work it's going to be, how many revisions a client is going to get, because I ended up in a similar situation. I did kind of keep working. And then I did reach a point where I said, okay, I'm going to have to be paid. I'm going to have to be paid more if we're going to keep accommodating these other requests. And at that point, then the client was very upset because they felt that they had been cheated because I hadn't put any limitation on the revisions in our initial conversations. But I will say that they paid more, and then they just had that one last round of revisions, and then they didn't ask for any other requests because I think at that point they knew that it would cost them. So, but that was very uncomfortable to do. And there was a part of me that wanted to just be like, oh, forget it. I'll just like finish this and get this over with and then, do better the next time. So you could do that if you want to. You don't have to confront the client. You can just like try to finish out the project and then the next time have like a more comprehensive agreement when you get started. Or you can confront the client if you're okay with feeling a bit uncomfortable. So yeah, sorry again that this is happening to you and that you're in that situation. It's super frustrating and I definitely sympathize. All right, next question. This is from Daisies and Pandas. Does editorial work often get published before the invoice is paid? And unfortunately, yes. That is a very common. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, Sivok. I hope I'm saying your name right. Yes, it's a super common situation. So, and I know I talk about this all the time in videos, like how you need to ask for a deposit and how you should get a deposit. But editorial is like unfortunately, the one exception to that rule. I'm trying to think if I have ever gotten a deposit for an editorial commission. At the moment, nothing is coming to mind. I think pretty much every editorial commission I've done has had no deposit. It's always paid at the end. And unfortunately, some of my editorial commissions don't pay until like 60 or 90 days after receiving the invoice. So that's another reason why editorial is great. It can be, oh, yay, hey, Guna, yay. Oh, so glad you're here. That's one of the reasons why working exclusively in editorial can be really challenging because the payment terms are often very long and they don't have deposits. So that being said, I've never not been paid by an editorial client. I've always ended up being paid, but they do have these really, really long terms. So the best thing you can do to protect yourself there is have a clause in your contract. I've talked about this in different videos too. Have a clause in your contract that states that their right to use the image is contingent upon them paying you. So what that does is motivate them to pay you, because if in 6 months or a year they still haven't paid you, then you would have like really strong grounds to potentially seek some sort of legal action. I'm sorry that I'm just realizing that my phone is like shaking all over the place because I have it mounted on my desk and I keep like fidgeting and kicking my desk. Sorry if I've been giving people vertigo. All right, next question is from Javier. Actually, Javier sent a few different questions, so I'm just going to zip through these. Number one is, do you need to become an LLC, limited liability corporation, to work with newspapers or magazines as a freelance editorial illustrator, or is it okay to be a sole entrepreneur? So I've talked about this too. I'm still a solo entrepreneur, why can I suddenly not think of there's like an official name for what that is in the tax code? Sole proprietor, that's the word. Yeah, I am still a sole proprietor. I may transition to an LLC at some point. It really has to do like whether, this is for the US anyway, the decision of whether to be a sole proprietor or be an LLC is more to do like with the size of your business and the potential like tax implications. And also becoming an LLC takes a lot of paperwork and has fees associated with it. So up until now, and even still now, it's not quite worth it for me to do the LLC thing. Maybe within another year or two, I might reconsider it. But yeah, you don't have to have an LLC. You don't have to be an LLC to work with newspapers or magazines. Some will ask you to have business insurance. That was something I had heard about and had never seen in place. But one of my more recent regular clients, I had to have business insurance, which I already actually had it in place. Because of getting the external studio, so that was good. But yeah, so you might need to have business insurance depending on the magazine. But again, I only have now just seen that one time in all of the different commissions I've done, and you definitely don't have to have an LLC. Next question, Javier is from Honduras. Let me read the rest of the question. He says, let's say I do an editorial illustration for a U.S. newspaper or magazine. Do I have to pay U.S. taxes besides the taxes that I'm paying in Honduras? Or do I just have to pay taxes for the country that I live in? I don't know. I'm reading this because it's with all of Javier's other questions, and I didn't want him to think that I ignored it. But my guess is no, but I am not a tax expert. And usually, what I have had to do when I've worked internationally is I have to submit. I forget what it's called, but it's basically like a form that says I pay taxes in my own country. Therefore, I don't have to pay taxes in this country. But not even, I've only had a couple of international clients that have required that. They don't all seem to require it. So based on that, I have not, based on my experience, I have not had to pay taxes in other countries when I have been hired. Um, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense, Ebuk. Um, and yeah, so I would just look in, I'd do some Googling for that one. You should be able to find a pretty clear answer on Google about that. Next question. Do you make contracts with newspapers or magazines when you're working on editorial commission, or did they make the contracts and then send them to you? It's some of both. So I have had some where they just sign my contract, some where I just sign their contract, and some where we, sign one another's contracts. So it's kind of a combination. But I think it is a good idea. We've talked about a couple of kind of painful examples of working with clients and having things go off of the rails. So there are very few things that I would say you absolutely have to have this in place before you start freelancing or before you start taking on clients, but some sort of basic agreement, whether it's an actual contract or something that's in the body of an email, but something that outlines what your process is, the actual scope, so what the client's going to be getting at the end, like what they are physically paying you for, and the number of revisions. Definitely having those three things. There's probably a fourth thing that I'm thinking. I feel like there's always four things that I mentioned, and now I can't only think of three, but having some sort of baseline agreement ready to go, so that you have your head wrapped around that as well. I would try to have that done before you start taking on freelance clients. But even if you don't, you'll be like me. I didn't have that at the beginning either, and you'll figure it out at some point. So yes, some combination of signing their contracts, them signing yours, and you signing one another's. All right, last question from Javier. What do you recommend when it comes to licensing editorial illustrations for newspapers? I understand that some want exclusivity for a couple of months. What can you advise me on this? Okay, so every editorial commission I have done has been an original work that they then have, yes, some sort of license to use for a specific period of time. Some will license existing works as well. I've heard about other people doing that. It's not been something that I've done. In terms of exclusivity, that really varies from publication to publication. So I would say anywhere from like 30 days to a year of exclusivity is pretty standard. I've seen that whole range across many different clients. That being said, I have had it happen a couple of times recently where I've read gotten into the nitty gritty of their contract. This is always with a client supplied contract. And it turned out that they're like asking actually for exclusivity in perpetuity. So essentially like all the rights. And that should not happen in editorial, and whether it's newspapers or magazines, it should not happen. They don't need it. It's an overreaching of the rights that are standard in that industry. So if you do have a situation where they're saying they need all the rights or exclusivity in perpetuity, that's not standard. And I have walked away from agreements because of that. And I've also said to the client, no, that's not standard, or I'm not willing to sign with these terms. And then they've said, okay, well, how about we'll do 60 days? So the other thing you can ask for is, say if they want exclusivity for a year, which is the long time for editorial, or usage rights for a year, you can still say, I need to be able to put this in my portfolio after 30 days or 60 days or whatever you're comfortable with. And usually they're fine with that. The main thing that they don't want to happen is for you to like sublicense it or license it to somebody else. Not sublicense, relicense it to somebody else. But most of them, at least all the ones that I have asked, are just fine with me putting it in my portfolio as long as I wait like 30 days after the date on the cover, or the issue date of whatever newspaper or magazine it is. And then also there are some that are like really happy for you to share it actually right away as soon as it's out, because then you can promote the magazine or promote the newspaper. So yeah, definitely something to raise with a client, and just to ask, you know, whether they're comfortable with that, like with you using it in your social media before the exclusivity period is up. All right, on to the next question. These are some materials questions from Mel Dixon. Is there a specific weight and color you prefer in the BFK Reeves paper? Does it behave similarly to Arches, the cold pressed Arches? I feel like Arches is the industry standard, but it often lets me down. Maybe I need to use more water. So I have never been a big fan of Arches. I used it a lot when I was in school. And I have a whole big block of the hot press one. It's just not, I don't know. I feel like it's too slick. I don't like the feel of it, but I know a lot of people do really like Arches. BFK Reeves versus like a standard cold press paper is a lot more like soft feeling, like, or spongy even, like it's very absorbent. And one thing I really like with BFK Reeves, when I'm working in watercolor, it stays wet a little bit longer. I think because it's a printmaking paper, it is super absorbent. Oh yeah, I totally agree, Disha. Fabriano is my favorite for standard watercolor paper at this point. That's what I go for. But yeah, BFK Reeves is a printmaking paper. It's not actually a watercolor paper. So it's a printmaking paper, and it just stays wet for longer. So I feel like when I lay things down, especially if it's something I want to have kind of like a soft feel, where I don't want to have like a ton of visible texture like a portrait, it's just nice to be able to like kind of keep working in and keep blending, and it'll end up with any hard edges in my watercolor. Um, and I think the weight that I get is the 300 GSM. It's whatever the heaviest weight one is. I haven't tried the lighter weight ones. I always, pretty much in any paper, maybe except for the Fabriano actually, I go for the heaviest weight that I can, because I put so many layers on. So it's not at all unusual for me to have like a couple, anywhere from like 2 to 4 layers of watercolor on there, and then several layers of colored pencil as well. So I really need it to be pretty sturdy and pretty heavy duty. So yeah, the BFK Reeves, I would just get the 300 gram or 300 GSM. Oh, and color too. I get a few different colors. I get either the white or the ivory. I do like, actually, let me see if I can grab, no, I can't show it to you yet. I just did some wildlife paintings on a toned BFK Reeves, the gray BFK Reeves. If it's something that's really light, or it's something that has a lot of white in it, I like to use one of their colored papers, like either the gray or the tan, just because I feel like it's easier for me to see the tonal differences than in the white when I'm working on a darker ground. So yeah, I love BFK Reeves. Every once in a while, I'll start using something more often, and then I still just come back to it. It's just like such a good paper. And then Mel also mentions that they've tried the Fabriano Hot Press. And wondering if I have tried that and how I would compare it to the soft press one. So I use the Fabriano Hot Press, and I use Fabriano Cold Press. I think I ordered some soft press in my last order, but I haven't pulled it out yet. I don't like to try new papers when I'm working on client projects, and I've mostly been only working on client projects recently. So I am looking forward to trying the soft press one, but I haven't tried it yet. And overall, I feel like with the Fabriano paper, I like the Fabriano Hot Press a lot better than the Arches Hot Press. It is much more absorbent, and the surface doesn't feel quite as slick to me. That being said, like it dries super fast. So you end up with a lot of that kind of like the edge. I don't even know what that's called. I think there's probably like a name for it in classical watercolor painting, if I was a watercolor painter who knew that stuff. But like when it dries and there's like an edge, a darker edge, it kind of looks like it's feathered out. I don't know what that's called, but you end up with a lot more of that when you're using the Fabriano Hot Press, because it just, yeah, it dries so quickly. So it's not as workable feeling to me as the Reeves BFK. I tend to use it. It's this like the reason I'll reach for that over the Reeves, because they both have a smooth surface, Yeah, oh yeah, maybe it's Bloom. Maybe that's what it is. Bloom. Sure. Thank you, Disha. um, the reason I would reach for the Fabriano over the Reeves is that it's a harder surface. So the Reeves has like a really soft surface. So if I want to work on like a smaller spot illustration that has a good amount of detail, like I might need to get in there with a really sharp pencil, I'll usually do that on the hot press, the Fabriano hot press, as opposed to the Reeves, because the Reeves can get kind of like, you have to be, you don't have to be delicate with it, because you can definitely like put a ton of pigment down, but it just, the Reeves doesn't do well with like a super, super sharp pencil. So that's usually why I would reach for the hot press. And then the cold press, the two papers I use the most often are the Reeves BFK and then the cold pressed Fabriano. The hot press is really only for specific situations, but the cold pressed Fabriano is just like a really nice texture. It's super absorbent. I can get like a really painterly look with that because I can just pile on the colored pencil and then use Gamsol blended if I want. And then Mel's last question is, do you use your Hydras paints in a butcher tray and just drop out what you need for one painting? So I use, where did I put this? I use this for my Hydras paints. I've tried a number of different palettes for them, and I had different like plastic well palettes. I just like how pretty this one is. That's probably why I keep using it. But the ceramic is nice. I feel like it cleans up a little bit easier than the plastic does, although obviously this is like completely demolished now. The other thing I like about this one is that it has these like little teeny tiny wells, like, so they're all different sizes. So if you're good about planning out which colors you're going to use, you can do just like a tiny amount in these smaller wells, and then do your main colors in the bigger wells. So this is what I use, and yeah, I really like it. I do try to only dispense what I need for one painting, and I'll like kind of work my way up. I'll just do like a couple of drops, and then if it feels like I need more, I'll add more. And if you don't know what Hydras is, it's a liquid watercolor that liquid watercolor concentrate. So even though it's already liquid, you still add more water to it, just like you would with any other watercolor. And then if I end up having a lot left in the palette and I want to save it for the next day, this thing fits really well into a quart-sized Ziploc bag. So I'll just like carefully slide it into a Ziploc bag and then close it. And then that keeps them workable. So yeah, I also just got the Hydras liquid acrylic ink. I think it's called like Spectralite. I think that's the name of the range. And I'm super excited to try that. I'm probably going to use a different palette because since this is watercolor, even these dried on bits, I could get these off if I really wanted to. But with acrylic, once it dries, it's dry. So I'm going to have to research what sort of palette I'll use with that. All right, I think we're coming to the end here, but I did write down, or I did copy over into my notes. This isn't a question, but it was a really helpful comment that I wanted to share with you guys because it's something I haven't thought of, and it's something someone commented on a video. So this was a comment from Emily Cobb, it was on the video about like I think it was on negotiations and sorry, notifications. Anyway, I'm going to read her comment here. Emily says, I think it's helpful to remember when doing negotiations that the client doesn't want to spend the time and effort to find another artist when they've already found you. So they do already have an incentive to work with you and to find an agreement. And I thought that was a really great point. So, once you have gone back and forth a few times with a client, that I have found that to be mostly true as well, that they have already invested not just their time, but like some of their emotion, like especially if it's for a project that they themselves are involved in, they already are imagining the way that your work will look on their product or on their project. So yeah, absolutely. I think remembering that it is work for the client, and even if it's like an art director, I think maybe even more so in that case, then yeah, for them it is mostly about time. They don't want to spend the time trying to track down somebody else. So you do have that leverage as well. And I thought, yeah, that was a really great point. So I have seen comments coming up. I'm looking through trying to see if I can, I'm on my phone here. I don't know. I'm trying to look if there were any other questions that you guys asked. I saw things popping up while we were talking, but I didn't see any specific questions. So, yeah, I think we'll probably leave it here for today. And I'll make this available so people can watch it later if they want to. So that's it. Let me know if you guys like this. We can do this sort of thing again with more notice next time. I obviously just decided to do it last minute. So yeah, and I hope you guys are having a good week. Sorry for the weird beginning too. If anyone was here and saw the part where I'm just like staring at the screen for 2 minutes. Yeah, hope you guys have a good week, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.